Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is your host, Time Burner. Today we're going to be going over the helicopter tab and the plane tab on my Warsaw Pact Eastern Bloc Multi-Role deck. But before I get into the guts of that, I wanted to kind of touch on a topic that me and the Digital Aviator were discussing in the previous, in the comments of the previous video. And what he had mentioned is, since he had mentioned that he's a Blue 4 player most of the time, and so that he's never really had a whole lot of experience with Red 4, and especially their kind of sub-faction decks. Like Eastern Bloc, I would consider a sub-faction of of Russia, right? It's not as mainstream as Russia, and so he was surprised how thin the vehicle tab was in terms of selection. And honestly, I'm going to go ahead and say it, the helicopter tab is just as thin as the vehicle tab. But we'll touch on that, you know, here in a few minutes. But I also wanted to mention that outside of Russia and China, it's definitely the selection in terms of units. Like, you're not going to have the selection you're not going to have the same selection as if Russia, because a lot of people just assume that, oh, if you play as Red 4, you're going to get every single vehicle that the Russians have. Well, no, not really. Russia has units, like, I would love to have the BTR, the vehicle tab. Inside the vehicle tab in Russia, you get the BTR 90, you get the BMP-T, the BMP-T, and then also it's I can't remember the name of it. Basically, it's an anti-tank guided missile that has 2,800 meter range, whereas the most range I can get out of my vehicle tab is 2,600. You know, so it's definitely something to be aware of. If you decide to play Red 4, you're not going to have the same selection as Russia or China if you pick one of their, like North Korea. Like, if you pick the North Korean faction, you're not going to have the same selection as China. If you pick Eastern Bloc, you're not going to have the same selection as Russia. And so that's something to be aware of. And I honestly think it adds to the challenge, where I'm not saying that Russia is not challenging, but I honestly, I feel more accomplished winning a game as using my Eastern Bloc deck than I do my Russian deck. I don't know why, that's just my opinion. But, you know, to me, I've spent a lot more time picking these units, whereas with my Russian deck, honestly, you can't really go wrong. They have such a broad selection of units, you cannot really go wrong. Whereas with Eastern Bloc, you kind of have to make sure all your units, or most of your units, are adaptable to the situation. Pretty much except armor, most of my units are completely versatile in terms of, you know, they can cross a stream, or they can attack helicopters versus airplanes, or they can kill infantry as well as light armor. You know, they're very versatile. They're not just, I'm not picking a unit because it's just a specialty unit because I like it, or it's, you know, it looks cool. Like, every unit in this deck has a purpose. So with that said, I wanted to go ahead and jump into the helicopter tab, and kind of also prove what I just mentioned about being thin in terms of selection. This is the helicopter tab in the Eastern Bloc faction. As you can see, it's what, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 helicopters. You get 13 helicopters to choose from. And really, if you consider all the helicopters that are pretty much the same except have slightly different armament, the D8, like this Mi-24 right here, this one right here, this is the KHS Mi-24P, the Mi-24W, which I have in my deck, and I'll explain why I picked it in a little bit. And then the Mi-25 S24, that's what, 1, 2, 3, basically a third of the helicopters are basically the same. The only other difference is you've got some light, very light helicopters that I honestly don't mess with. I mean, this one's got a small cannon on it with quad light machine guns on it. It's really not, it's not worth my time. In my opinion, it's not worth my time. I don't really see a use for this in my deck. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and just jump into what helicopters I picked and why. So first up is the Polish W3W Sokol. The reason I picked this is because at its price point, it has AA capability. It has 4 infrared missiles with okay stats, but it also has ground capability, anti-ground capability, or surface unit, or anti-surface vehicle capabilities with the rocket pods and these and the autocannon. I picked this one for this helicopter is what, if it's a large map, in terms of I need a helicopter to get to the other side with any, you know, in any reasonable amount of time, I will pick this helicopter and maybe one or two of these helicopters and then a recon helicopter, and I'll send them forward looking for helicopter rushes. If it's a big map, a lot of people love to do the immediate helicopter rush around the flanks, and so what I'll do is I'll try to spot those helicopter rushes before they get too close or far enough away that I can then adjust my AA defenses to engage those helicopters as soon as possible. Besides that, that's really the main reason I picked this. It's good, fast, mobile AA capability, but it also can attack ground vehicles if the opportunity shows itself. The next helicopter that I picked is the Mi-24W. It's, again, Polish. The reason I picked this helicopter is because if you look at some of the other helicopters, this one has AA capability as well as ATGM capability. This one has, it's basically the exact same as my Mi-24 that I have picked. Same thing with this one. They're pretty much the exact same. I picked this one because it has, it's got, in my opinion, better autonomy in terms of it can stay out in the field longer. This Mi-24, it doesn't have as many ATGMs. It's got more rocket pods than it does ATGMs. The other helicopter has, again, less ATGMs and more rocket pods, whereas this Mi-24 has more ATGMs than it does rocket pods, and that's what I wanted. I wanted as much anti-tank guided missile capability as I possibly could get, and that's why this one is slightly more expensive than all the other ones. This one's 80, and this one is 75. And then there's also this one down here that I could have picked, and really there's literally no difference between these two helicopters. I'll just pin it to show you. I mean, I'm just looking over real quick, and there is no difference whatsoever between these two helicopters. So even the year and the type of the year down here is the exact same. So I mean, there's no, it's at that point it's just countries, and I guess I like the way that the Mi-24 from the Polish deck looks, or from the Polish helicopter looks better than the Mi-35. And that's the only time that I'm gonna pick aesthetics over actual real stats. This deck is definitely all about function more than it is about form, or just because I built this deck from the ground up to be effective in a multi-role capability. And so with that said, that pretty much wraps up the helicopter tab. I want to jump into the air tab. So with the air tab, again, you do have a broad selection, but in my eyes, it's not really that broad. There's not a whole lot of units here, and I'll explain why. Red 4 aircraft are notoriously bad in terms of ECM, electronic countermeasures. If you look down here, you'll see the ECM 0%. What 0% means is either the enemy better have 0 air or anti-air batteries and have no anti or air superiority fires in the air, because if you fly one of these aircraft that have 0 ECM on them into an AA zone, an air defense zone, chances are it's not coming back out. And so the fact that Red 4 aircraft already had, like, even the high-end Red 4 aircraft, which I have most of them in my deck. Even the high-end aircraft do not have the ECM capability that the high-end aircraft in the Blue 4 deck has. So you really have to be cautious with your aircraft. You don't have the amount of aircraft the Blue 4 can throw, and you don't have the quality that Blue 4 has. And so that's one of the things that I think the Blue 4's Air Force is better than Red 4's Air Force, in my opinion. That's not to say like, oh, boo-hoo, Red 4's Air Force is no good. No, it's a challenge, and you've got to be able to step up to that challenge and understand your weaknesses and understand your strengths and play towards your strengths. So, with that, pep talk, with that pep talk out of the way, here's the units that I've selected. So, up first, this is my seed aircraft. Now, I want to actually show you this real quick as well. If you look, this is all the seed aircraft that I have to choose from. That's it. Like that is it. And the only reason that I picked the SU-22M4P over the other one, even though they have the exact same names, the reason I picked the East German one is because it has longer range. As you can see, it's got 2 giant seed missiles, whereas the other one has 4 smaller seed missiles. Because of the fact, even though this has 30% ECM, whereas the other one has 40, but still, the 30% and 40% ECM is just not going to cut it. If you send this aircraft too far into enemy territory, it is just going to get chewed to pieces. And even barely crossing over my front line, I've seen this aircraft time and time again get shot down by either air superiority fighters or enemy air defense, just time and time again. It's just, I don't know how many times I've seen this aircraft. I buy it, I call it in, it kills 1 or 2 things, and then it gets shot down before it can evac the zone, and I'm just like, crap. I mean, it's kind of sad that the ECM is so low. I wish that I had a selection or an aircraft that had better ECM, but I don't, and so I picked this one to give me as far of a standoff distance between me and my target as possible. So I'm going to clear my filters so that I can see all my aircraft again, and then I'm going to jump to the next one. So this is my air superiority fighter. This is the cream of the crop, in my opinion, in terms of aircraft, especially in the just in any category across the board. This is probably one of the best aircraft in the Eastern Bloc deck. It's a MiG-29, one of my favorite aircraft of all times, but as you can tell, it has fire and forget, which is really, really good to have in an air superiority fighter. That means basically I can fire a missile, and my aircraft can then evac out of the area, and that missile is still going to go after the target. I don't have to sit there and guide the missile to the target, and that's really, really important in this game. I've seen it where if you don't have the range, I'll rephrase that. If you have to guide the missile to the target, that opens your aircraft up to be counterattacked by either ground AA or other enemy air superiority fighters. And so, like, a good example of this is, say I fly this aircraft around my front lines, and then the enemy calls in an aircraft, and I decide to engage that aircraft. If this thing had guided missiles, it would have to follow that aircraft around until the missile hit, which is not good, because if he goes back over friendly territories to him, my aircraft is now in enemy territory trying to shoot down their aircraft while he's dodging other missiles. So with fire and forget, I can call him in, engage an aircraft, and before I go into enemy territory, I can call him off. And that's pretty much the strategy I see most aircraft players or people using their aircraft follow. As you can tell, it's got 40% ECM. Like I said, that's pretty much the max that you can get in Red 4. At least in the Eastern Bloc deck, 40% is the highest, I believe, that you can get. So that's the air superiority fighter. Next on my list is the MiG-29 again. But this is actually the multi-role version. As you can tell, it's got bombs on it, but not just regular HE bombs. It has napalm bombs. I love this aircraft because it's quick. It's just a very fast approach. It drops the payload and it evacs. Even though it still has missiles left, it evacs once it drops the bombs. And I love that. I don't have to micromanage it after dropping a payload. The napalm bombs are devastating against infantry, but it's I'm not exactly sure how it's calculated, but basically it's got HE power of 12, but it also has napalm. I don't know if that's a separate statistic or if that's the same, but basically it has a 12 HE power against infantry, so it blows up like a bomb, but then it leaves napalm, it leaves a fire on the ground that burns infantry. So it's a really, really effective payload for this aircraft, and that's the main reason I picked this, is because it's a halfway decent fighter still. It still has AA capabilities, but I mostly use this aircraft as a fast bomber, just a very fast ground attack aircraft. And speaking of ground attack aircraft, we're going to go to the last aircraft in my selection, and that is the Su-25K. Now, the reason I have picked this aircraft is mostly because of this missile right here, the KH-25ML. As you can see, it's got 3,100 meter range, and it's got 4 of them. And so it's got a very long standoff range, and it's pretty accurate, 50% accuracy, but more or less the AP power is 28. That's huge. Pretty much, other than the highest of main battle tanks, this thing will pretty much kill any tank one shot, whether it be from the front, the side, the top, especially the top, especially the side, and especially the rear. The only way that a high-end main battle tank is going to survive is if it takes one on the chin in the front. And honestly, I pretty much every time I called this thing out on a tank or an armored vehicle, it's usually dead. It usually can fire off 2 missiles before it flies over the target and has to loop back around. It can usually fire off 2 missiles, and so even if the first one doesn't kill it and it only damages it, the second one is going to finish the job. Other than that, the rocket pods, they're okay. They're pretty good against infantry out in the open, light armor, but really the bread and butter of this aircraft is these missiles. And that's pretty much it for the aircraft tab. I hope I'm not going too fast. I like to keep these videos shorter for you guys because it's easier for me to upload, but it's also, I don't want to bore you with some 40-minute video where I'm just rambling, because I know I have a tendency to do that. So with that said, I want to wrap this video up, but I do want to say, I guess kind of the homework assignment for you guys watching is, in the comments, tell me what your favorite vehicles are. Whether it be blue 4 or red 4, doesn't matter. Tell me what your favorite vehicles are and why. And then also just tell me whether or not you like the format of these videos. If you don't, what you would change, that kind of stuff. I really appreciate I'm all for some constructive criticism. I want these videos to be enjoyable for you guys. That's why I make them. I enjoy filming them and editing them and putting them up online. But I also enjoy reading your guys' comments after I post the videos. So please like, comment, subscribe. It means a lot to me, and it helps the channel out. And I think that's really about it for you guys. This video is pretty much done, so time burner. Deuces.